When veteran Jessica Martin and her service dog Max faced fines and eviction, COA leader Diane Parker thought she could bully them into submission. But Jessica fought back, uncovering shocking secrets that changed everything. You won't believe how justice was finally served in this dramatic showdown. Jessica Martin had dreamed of this moment for years, a fresh start. The small condo in a quiet neighborhood was everything she needed, a sanctuary where she could raise her 8-year-old daughter, Lily, and finally feel at peace after her years of military service. For Jessica, this wasn't just a move, it was the beginning of a new chapter. As she unpacked boxes in her cozy new living room, Max, her loyal golden retriever, lay at her feet. Max wasn't just her pet, he was her lifeline, trained to help her manage the PTSD that had lingered since her deployment in Afghanistan. Every wag of his tail reminded her that she wasn't alone, even in the hardest moments. To Jessica, Max was more than a dog. He was hope wrapped in golden fur. But that hope was tested far sooner than she expected. Just a week after moving in, Jessica found a neatly folded letter taped to her front door. It was from the Condo Owners Association, COA. The first line made her stomach drop. Pets are not allowed on the property unless certified as emotional support animals or service animals by our board. Jessica blinked at the words, her mind racing. Max wasn't just a pet. He was a certified service animal under the Americans with Disabilities Act, ADA. She had all the paperwork to prove it. Surely, this was a misunderstanding. Deciding to clear things up, she sent an email to the COA office the same day, attaching Max's certification and a letter from her doctor. She felt confident the matter would be resolved quickly. But 2 days later, another letter arrived, this one harsher, colder. The COA claimed her documentation was insufficient and gave her an ultimatum: either remove Max from the property within 30 days or face escalating fines and possible eviction. Jessica felt her heart pound with a mix of anger and fear. How could they ignore federal law? And what did they mean by insufficient documentation? She sat at her kitchen table, the letter crumpled in her hand, as Max rested his head on her knee, sensing her distress. Tears welled up in her eyes, not from sadness, but from sheer frustration. Max had been her lifeline through sleepless nights and anxiety-filled days. Losing him wasn't an option. The next morning, Jessica reached out to the COA president, Diane Parker, hoping to resolve things calmly, but Diane's response left her reeling. On the phone, Diane was dismissive, even condescending. "We have rules for a reason, Miss Martin," she said flatly. "If we made exceptions for everyone, we'd have chaos. You'll need to find another solution." Jessica clenched her fists as she hung up the phone. Another solution? Max was the solution. He had been the only constant in her life when everything else had crumbled. And now, a group of strangers who barely knew her story were threatening to take that away. That night, Jessica sat on the couch with Lily, who was blissfully unaware of the storm brewing. As her daughter giggled at cartoons, Jessica silently resolved to fight back. She wouldn't let anyone bully her into giving up her rights, or her dog. And so, the battle began. Little did Jessica know, this fight would test her resilience in ways she never imagined, and uncover secrets about the COA that would shock the entire neighborhood. Jessica arrived at the COA meeting early, clutching a folder of neatly organized documents. The small conference room, with its beige walls and flickering fluorescent lights, felt oppressive. A long table dominated the space, surrounded by stern-faced board members, all waiting for her to present her case. Diane Parker sat at the head, her posture rigid and her lips pressed into a thin line. Even without speaking, she exuded an air of authority that dared anyone to challenge her. Jessica took a deep breath, her fingers tightening on Max's leash as he sat obediently by her side. She opened the meeting with calm determination, laying out her case. She spoke about her service in Afghanistan, the PTSD diagnosis that followed, and how Max had been trained to assist her. She presented the official certification, hoping the board would see reason. But Diane's expression didn't soften. If anything, it hardened. "Your dog is a distraction," she said sharply, her voice cutting through the air like a cold wind. "And frankly, we've had complaints from neighbors. They say the barking is disruptive." Jessica's mouth dropped open in disbelief. Barking? Max had been silent since they moved in. Jessica had made sure of it. "That's not true," she replied firmly. "Max is a trained service animal. He doesn't bark without reason, and he hasn't caused any issues." Diane leaned forward, her hands clasped together on the table. "Unless you can prove your alleged disability and your dog's necessity, Max has to go. We have rules, Miss Martin, and they apply to everyone." Jessica's cheeks burned with anger and humiliation. Prove her disability? The sheer nerve of it left her momentarily speechless. Gathering her composure, she addressed the board. "I've already provided the necessary documentation. Max is protected under the ADA. Federal law supersedes any rules you have here." Diane waved her off with a dismissive gesture. "We follow our own rules here. Federal law doesn't dictate what happens in my building." For a moment, the room fell silent, the tension palpable. Jessica glanced around, searching for even a glimmer of support from the other board members, but their faces remained impassive. It was as though Diane's words had sealed their lips. Jessica felt the weight of the room pressing down on her, a suffocating blend of hostility and indifference. She stood, gathering her documents and Max's leash. "This isn't over," she said, her voice steady despite the storm of emotions raging inside her. Diane raised an eyebrow, a faint smirk tugging at the corners of her mouth. "You're welcome to try, Miss Martin, but we'll see how far you get." Jessica walked out of that meeting fuming, her mind racing with thoughts of what to do next. She had never been one to back down from a challenge, and she wasn't about to start now. If Diane thought she could bully her into submission, she had another thing coming. As she stepped out into the cool evening air, Jessica looked down at Max, who met her gaze with calm, unwavering loyalty. She felt a surge of determination. This wasn't just about her or even Max. It was about standing up for what was right, for everyone who had ever been made to feel small or powerless in the face of authority. Diane might have thought she'd won the battle, but Jessica was determined to win the war. Jessica sat at her kitchen table, her laptop open, the warm glow of the lamp illuminating the documents scattered around her. Max lay at her feet, his steady breathing grounding her in the moment. She had spent hours researching the ADA and her rights as a service dog handler, and now she had an ally, a lawyer who specialized in cases like hers. His voice on the phone had been reassuring. "You're in the right, Jessica. The COA is violating federal law, plain and simple." Hearing those words gave Jessica a renewed sense of purpose. She wasn't imagining the injustice, and she wasn't overreacting. With her lawyer's guidance, she began to meticulously document everything, every letter, every email, and even Diane's curt remarks during their last meeting. She downloaded a voice recorder app on her phone and started capturing conversations, just in case. Diane's dismissive tone and veiled threats would become evidence in what was quickly turning into a battle for justice. But Jessica knew she couldn't fight this fight alone. She started knocking on her neighbors' doors, sharing her story in hopes of gaining their support. To her surprise, many of them opened up about their own experiences with Diane's heavy-handed leadership. An elderly widow, Mrs. Thompson, recounted through tears how Diane had fined her for improper window treatments. Unable to afford the mounting fees, Mrs. Thompson had been forced to sell her home, her late husband's last gift to her. "I didn't think anyone could stand up to her," Mrs. Thompson said, her voice trembling. "But maybe you can." Jessica's heart ached at the stories she heard. This wasn't just about Max anymore. Diane had built a reign of control, using fines and threats to intimidate anyone who dared to challenge her. Jessica realized that by standing her ground, she wasn't just fighting for herself. She was fighting for her entire community. But Diane wasn't about to back down. Jessica's refusal to pay the fines for Max had clearly struck a nerve. One morning, she stepped into the building's lobby and froze. There, pinned to the bulletin board, was a large notice in bold red letters. Unit 207, in violation of COA regulations, legal action pending. Jessica's cheeks burned as neighbors passed by, some glancing at her with curiosity, others with sympathy. Diane had made her a public target. That evening, Jessica sat on her couch, the notice crumpled in her hand. Tears welled up as the weight of it all threatened to overwhelm her. Max, sensing her distress, nudged her hand with his nose, his soft brown eyes full of quiet reassurance. Jessica stroked his fur, her fingers trembling. "We're going to get through this," she whispered, more to herself than to him. As the tears subsided, a new resolve took their place. Jessica wasn't just fighting for her own dignity. She was standing up for everyone who had been silenced or bullied by Diane's tactics. She glanced down at Max, his steady presence reminding her of why she had to keep going. This fight wasn't over, not by a long shot. Jessica sat in her living room, the soft hum of her laptop the only sound in the room. Max lay curled at her feet, his steady presence a constant reminder of why she was fighting. The evening light filtered through the window, casting warm golden hues across the room, but Jessica's mind was focused on the task at hand. With a deep breath, she submitted a formal complaint to the Department of Justice, detailing every violation of her rights under the ADA. Alongside it, she fired off an email to a local journalist known for exposing housing discrimination. Days later, Jessica's phone buzzed with a message from the journalist. "Your story airs tonight at 6 p.m. Stay strong." That evening, Jessica and Lily sat together on the couch, the television casting a soft glow across the room. The segment opened with a shot of Jessica and Max walking through their neighborhood, the reporter's voice narrating her story. A decorated Navy veteran is fighting for her rights after her condo owners association threatened her with fines and eviction for keeping her service dog. As the story unfolded, Jessica felt a wave of emotions, pride, anger, and a deep resolve to see this through. When the segment ended, she checked her phone. Messages poured in from friends, neighbors, and even strangers who had seen the broadcast. People offered words of encouragement, shared their own stories of similar struggles, and expressed outrage at how Jessica was being treated. The public outcry was immediate and intense. Diane Parker began receiving emails and phone calls from furious viewers demanding accountability. But instead of showing remorse, Diane doubled down. At the next COA meeting, she addressed the situation with icy defiance. "This is nothing more than an attempt to exploit her status as a veteran," she said, her tone sharp. "We are simply enforcing the rules." Jessica clenched her fists as she watched Diane's comments in a clip shared online. Exploit her status? The sheer audacity left her momentarily speechless. But she didn't have time to dwell on Diane's words. Her lawyer was already moving forward. Within days, they filed an injunction to prevent the COA from imposing further fines, and the Department of Justice announced it was launching a formal investigation into the COA's practices. The story took a shocking turn when a neighbor, emboldened by Jessica's fight, came forward with a revelation. Diane had allegedly been pocketing COA funds for personal expenses, luxury vacations, high-end furniture, and even a private gym membership. The neighbor provided copies of suspicious financial records, which Jessica immediately handed over to the DOJ. As the investigation deepened, Diane's grip on the COA began to slip. Residents who had once feared speaking out now joined Jessica in her fight. The building buzzed with quiet conversations, and Jessica felt the tide beginning to turn. One evening, as she sat on her balcony watching the sunset, a neighbor approached her. "You've done something incredible," he said, his voice filled with gratitude. "We've all been afraid of her for so long, but you've given us hope." Jessica smiled, feeling a flicker of pride. She wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. She was fighting for everyone who had ever been silenced or intimidated. Diane's empire, once so unshakable, was crumbling, and Jessica was determined to see it fall completely. This was no longer just her battle. It was a community's stand for justice. The courtroom was tense, every eye fixed on Jessica as she presented her case with calm determination. Her lawyer outlined the COA's clear violations of the ADA, supported by emails, fines, and public notices designed to humiliate her. Jessica's testimony, heartfelt and resolute, silenced the room. "This fight isn't just for me," she said. "It's for anyone who's been silenced or mistreated." When the DOJ investigator revealed Diane Parker's misuse of COA funds, vacations, personal expenses, and more, the court gasped. Diane's composure crumbled as the evidence piled up, her defiant front giving way to visible panic. The judge's ruling was swift and decisive. Jessica won the case. The COA was fined $50,000 for violating federal law, ordered to undergo training, and placed under financial audit. Diana was forced to resign in disgrace. Jessica walked out of the courthouse with her head held high, Max by her side, his tail wagging as if he understood the victory. Neighbors approached her with gratitude and apologies, one man saying, "You didn't just fight for Max, you fought for all of us." That evening, Jessica sat at home with Lily and Max, the weight of the battle finally lifting. She smiled, knowing this wasn't just her win. It was a victory for justice, community, and the courage to stand up for what's right,